this is an interesting discussion here between Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty. They were talking about Gavin Newsom's turn in the Democratic Party. Like Gavin Newsom had an interview, I guess, with Steve Bannon. I don't know what's going on with Gavin. He got all over the place. I guess he's trying to figure out what he's going to do next. But the topic comes up about progressive policies and if it's really going to lead the Democratic Party or if that's really the way to go. Or where does the rest of the country actually feel? And I found this pretty interesting. And I want to hear what you guys think, because I kind of agree with both of them a little bit here. We'll see. Let's bring in this clip here again. Crystal and Sagar debate. It's the Gavin Newsom issue, but they're talking about where the Democratic Party is headed.
But I was fearful that a Gavin Newsom, who is very rhetorically skilled, who was very effective in that debate against Ron DeSantis. I think even conservatives had to admit, like, I handled himself pretty well there. If he had these people on and he fought with them, I think he would be unstoppable in 2028. And I'm actually glad in a sense that he's approaching it this way. And what I attribute it to, Sagar, is I think he's in these Silicon Valley donor circles where they're jealous of the right. You know, it's the same people like Hakeem Jeffries was talking to. And they want the more like conciliatory, capitulate, like make nice. That's the approach that they want. There is a big divide between that like donor base of the Democratic Party, especially the Silicon Valley donor base of the Democratic Party, and where the Democratic base is and what they want to see. And I can promise you, he is misreading the moment for the Democratic base in order to win a Democratic primary, like in an unbelievable way. So if you think about like the viewers of Brian Tyler Cohen, if you think about the Midas Touch brothers, like they in particular have been disgusted with him. Their viewers are disgusted with him. And that's where the energy in the party is right now.
I just don't want to overread it.
Let me just pause here. I just want to add, Brian Tyler Cohen is also one of those influencers that was also paid by, you know, one of those influencer brand companies. We talked about this before on the show. Like, so he is a paid influencer. Like, and I don't just mean like, oh, he has a YouTube channel and he does well with that. Like, no, he's a paid influencer. And there was a company, I shared it before on the show, where it was a part of the Democratic Party. This company in particular, they had paid influencers. And one of the paid influencers was that guy, Too Raw, Too Real, who was yelling at everybody on Twitter. So that was kind of revealed that these people were paid. So just keep that in mind. Like when you say these people are blowing up, you also have to look into what's the marketing behind it, right? Like who's pushing them, who's that type of thing. So just keep that in mind. He is one of those paid influencers. Let's continue.
You're right.
Because who's got better political judgment, the left or, you know, people like Gavin Newsom?
That's my point, is this isn't the left. No, and that's what I think Gavin Newsom is reading it as well. Because he thinks, oh, these are just like the Bernie people. They're always mad about everything. Whatever, shut up, right? You people voted for Joe Biden last time around. But the difference is, and this is what I think the Democratic Party is not understanding and is really failing on, is that it's not just the left. Telling you, it's the indivisible groups. It's the core, like the people who went to the Women's March. It is the core Democrat. You go to your average Democratic County Party meeting and it's flooded with regular normie Democrat voters. Like the median voter in the party is disgusted with party leadership for not putting up enough of a fight. And I think that's where they are profoundly misreading their own voters, because they think that it's still just like, oh, the Bernie people. No, this is your MSNBC watcher. These are the people who have flooded to Midas Touch, the people that have flooded to Brian Tyler Cohen, your normie resistance Democrat that thinks that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries need to resign yesterday, that are thoroughly disgusted with the patty cakes with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and Michael Savage and whatever, and are really looking for something different than what the Democratic leadership are providing.
So let me pause here for a second. So yeah, there is some of that energy that is happening where people are like I've heard it from all sides, where even some of the ones who did vote for Kamala Harris and they consider themselves to be Democrat Party loyalists are they're looking at things and they're like, why is the Democratic Party not fighting back harder against Donald Trump? They've had some criticisms against Chuck Schumer and also Hakeem Jeffries. However, from my experience and what I've been seeing is those people are not going to say, okay, I'm not going to support the Democratic Party. I'm not going to vote for them. Those people, especially those party loyalists and the people that she was referring to that attended like the women's marches, those people are still voting for the Democratic Party though. And this is the question I have, like when Sagar brings in this part here about the Bernie element, like the progressive, like policies or whatever, the reason why we haven't received real change for the working class is because the majority of people are not willing to hold the line. The majority of voters are not willing to hold the line. And I do feel like you have to show that in numbers. Now, outside of the two-party system, you can do that via third party, or you can do that in the streets, organizing, mobilizing, et cetera. That's another way that that can be done. But I think that those Women March participants, they still show up to vote for the Democratic Party. Now, listen to this part right here.
Right now,
maybe, it's certainly possible. I'm not ready to count Gavin out yet. I mean, I wouldn't count him out. You don't become governor of the biggest state in the country.
He is hurting himself. He is hurting himself right now.
I'm just not ready. I don't know. I mean, part of the reason, I'll just explain this because this is difficult. And there's a lot of data necessarily to back you up. But every online Democratic freakout and or vibe trend that I've seen from the liberals has never really worked out. And in general, you'd be probably better off over the last 5 years betting against anything that AOC and Bernie and all of them are fighting on than being on the side of them. So if you look at the social trends, if you look at from, wokeism to BLM to I could go on forever. Defending Biden, which a lot of them did, pro-Kamala, vibe shift, Brad Summer, Tim Walz, none of these bets have worked out. So I just am skeptical that this time their grand political judgment is there as opposed to the great survivors like Schumer and Gavin Newsom. In the interim, you might be correct, but their political judgment and track record is bad, especially in the back, from the last 5 to 7 years
you think Gavin
of overall
Newsom's political judgment.
I mean, he survived recall. He's got a high enough approval rating. Listen, I don't know how they put up with him over there, but they're the people who don't, they just left. I guess they moved to Florida, but they like him. I don't really get it. I'm not making a judgment about myself. I'm looking purely at the guy's metrics. He seems to be doing fine. He's got a decent approval rating with a lot of Democrats. So my only point is just, I'm skeptical that we're once again trying to see some wish cast of, what progressives and liberals have a very good way of shaping a narrative through media and through, Twitter and et cetera, into believing things are way more popular than they actually are. And
is that true? This is the question I wanted to ask you guys. Is what Sagar said there true? Like, do we believe that something may be more popular than it actually is because it's popular on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, but that's the online base and maybe it's not necessarily as popular in person? Is that true? A friend of mine, we had this little short debate about if Bernie would have won, right? And she said to me that Bernie Sanders, even if the DNC didn't cheat Bernie Sanders, that Bernie Sanders still wouldn't win because he can't win the black vote. And my pushback to that was, well, I think if Jim Clyburn would have endorsed Bernie Sanders instead of Joe Biden, then it probably would have been Bernie Sanders who won South Carolina. Maybe, I don't know. People were listening to what Clyburn said. I also lived in South Carolina, and I can tell you that South Carolina has the oldest electorate. So that's who Bernie would have had to win over. But she vehemently believes that even if that happened, that Bernie Sanders was not going to be able to capture enough of the black vote to win. When I went to those rallies back then, again, thousands of people, big crowds, same thing you kind of see now. Actually, crowds were a little bit bigger back then. Bigger crowds with Bernie and all that kind of stuff. He had a great turnout. And I saw this in person, like on the ground. But I think we have to start asking the question, does that transfer into votes? And that's when I'm starting to wonder. Could it be that these policies are very popular, like people support universal health care and they support like free pre-K, et cetera? And could be that all those people that went to those rallies like really believed what Bernie was saying, like, yay. But I have to ask myself, the 10,000 people that came to Bernie's rally in Boston Common, did they show up to vote in the Dem primary? Is the popularity for these policies making it to the polls? Is it making it to the voter box? And I think we need to ask this question because that would explain some things. Let's continue.
No electoral evidence to back any of that up.
Who do you think is going to be voting in a Democratic
I have
primary?
no idea. Listen, I don't know.
In a Democratic primary, I mean, that you have to appeal to
okay,
liberals.
but by that standard, then Bernie would have won in the 2020
No, because liberals were not behind him, Sagar. That's what you're missing, and that's what he's missing. Is I'm not talking about the, Bernie Sanders voter. Yes, they're pissed off, whatever. They're going to be, both, they're going to be looking at it from an ideological valence. No, I'm talking about your standard normie Democrat, like the base of the party. And that is what is so different. I mean, that's why these channels are blowing up massively.
Yeah, but how do we know that's not young,
energy.
disaffected people who are barely not going to vote anyway? Like, I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but I have no idea what the 65-year-old boomer out there and how they're exactly taking.
I mean, do you take?
But this is another good point. And I think, and this is why I said, like, I think they're both making good points here. But what Sagar just said is he was like, okay, yeah, those channels are blowing up, but that doesn't mean that those people are going to go out and vote. See, that's the thing. Just because someone's watching doesn't mean that's going to transfer into votes at the ballot box. There were a lot of people that were watching the pro-Bernie channels. I was one of them during the Bernie campaigns, but it didn't transfer over to votes in the primary in 2020. 2016, he was totally robbed. I hear you on that one. Totally robbed, where they took states from him that he won and gave them to Hillary Clinton. But in 2020, it did transfer over to the ballot box. Even here in Massachusetts, I saw way more Bernie signs. I didn't see any Biden signs in the Boston area, in Massachusetts. But Biden handsomely, was able to win here in Massachusetts because I think a lot of people here who have money, and we have a lot of millionaires here in the state, wanted to keep the status quo. So they were like, oh, we're just going to vote for Biden. We don't want this socialism stuff or whatever, that kind of thing. So that's the thing. Like, because more people are flocking to like the Brian Tyler Cohen or whatever, and they're growing, like I said, they were part of the paid influencer thing. So they have marketing that a lot of us don't have. Does that necessarily mean that those people are going to be willing to come out and vote for a candidate that has those progressive policies? And that's what I'm asking, folks. Because just because there's energy online, I mean, that doesn't mean that it's going to make it to the ballot box.
The
Do you put no stock in the fact that, listen, I know polls can be off, blah, 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 but the Democratic leadership being underwater with the Democratic base, 49% disapproval to 40% approval, that's so different, wildly different.
I put some stock in it.
And that is, your normie Democrat voter. Like, they are flooding these offices with calls. They are enraged by the capitulation from Joe Amica and MSNBC and the Washington Post and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Like, that is a very different dynamic than we have seen before. And so my contention here is simply that Gavin Newsom has an opportunity to make himself invincible in 2028, because I do think he has a lot of the things going for him that he's got plenty of money behind him. He's a smooth operator, all that stuff. But rather than making himself invincible, because if he came out as this like fighter in this moment, I think he would be very difficult to beat in 2028. Instead, I think that he is positioning himself in a way that hobbles him with the Democratic base. And I feel really confident about that. Now, is that a guarantee? No, of course not. But is he doing damage to himself when he had an opportunity to sort of make it make himself an unstoppable force, yeah, I do think so.
Maybe.
I don't think it matters if he really does damage to himself. He's related to Nancy Pelosi by marriage. They know how to make it work if they want to make it work. You know what I'm saying? You guys know what I'm talking about? Like, if they want to make it work so that he is the nominee, they will find a way to make it work so that he is the nominee. That's what people have to follow, is the money. Gavin Newsom, yeah, he in that club. We talking about a political dynasty here. Don't forget, Nancy Pelosi's father was also a politician in Baltimore. So put all of this together. He got the money and the resources to make it work if he wants to make it work. I do know people are really heavily criticizing this interview that he had with Steve Bannon. They're like, why are you sitting down with Steve Bannon? You know, what are you doing? Yada, yada. And it's just, I don't really care who Gavin Newsom chooses to talk to. But I think that there tends to be a lot of hype around that type of candidate because they are well known and because of the connections that they do have, even though, you know, there was a recall against him, which he managed to beat.
I don't know. I'm not ready to make the judgment call yet. I just don't trust the political judgment of a lot of the folks who I see at the helm right now. They've just had a terrible track record. And, you know, by the way, 40% approval is still higher than a lot of Republicans feel about their leadership. And those people survive all the time and they continue to win elections. So I'm not saying they aren't necessarily different, but you could go much lower. And I still think that things could be, I just don't think things will necessarily manifest in the same way. Will he be invincible? He's making different bets in terms of how he sees the coalition. Like, maybe there's also something to be said about somebody who wants to run for president as opposed to somebody who just needs a bunch of libs to show up in a low turnout midterm situation. That actually is qualitatively different for the overall base. I don't know, you know, who exactly or what is correct. I always just think it's important to put that caution out there. Like, look at the political track record of these people, and it's terrible. It's not one that has worked out at the ballot box. And so with that, you should think about that in the future. They could be correct this time, but they just don't have enough they don't have enough going for them in the past for me to make any real trust in their overall political judgment. I think it's definitely working to raise money online to get a bunch of liberals who already hate Trump, you know, excited. Sure, that's not hard, actually, though. What's actually hard is to win an election, which they've been completely unable to do.
We'll put a pin in it.
Yeah.
But again, I think you're focusing on AOC and Bernie, and that's not actually what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mainstream of the party, which you definitionally need in order to win a Democratic primary.
Sure, but then there's no mainstream elector or elected official who has access to probably more privileged data than you or I that is acting in the way that you're describing, which is what makes me a little bit skeptical that any of this is real. I mean, there are a lot of political entrepreneurs. These are the most opportunist pieces of egotistical people in the world.
Open up a whole other can of worms. But Tim Walz is moving in more of the direction where he's going out and doing town halls, following in sort of the Bernie model in Republican red districts. So, I mean, this is the other thing. It's the Newsom approach is also a very elitist approach versus the let me go out and not talk to Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. Let me go out and talk to voters in these places that, you know, that we've lost and that we need to win back, and in swing districts and in red parts of the country. And, you know, I also think that is a much better approach, going to the grassroots and talking to regular people about what's going on for them versus talking to, you know, making nice with the right wing influencer. But that's kind of my point.
But I think the thing that I wanted to just mention here is that it is really interesting to me that Tim Walz was willing to say that he accepts the blame for the loss. And he said, you know, we didn't run a good campaign. I don't see Kamala anywhere, but Tim Walz is going out there and he is talking to the voters and talking to people. And we really don't know where Kamala is. Have you guys noticed that? Kamala's not there, nowhere to be found, but he's facing the people. Whereas Gavin Newsom is doing a podcast and he is talking to people like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. Maybe Gavin Newsom does not want to run in 2028. Maybe he just wants to have a podcast. Maybe he wants to go into Hollywood or something. I don't know. But maybe he may not run in 2028. Maybe not. Maybe Gavin Newsom kind of wanted this round to be his go, the 2024 round. I don't know.
Is that what we're trusting the political judgment of one of the only two Democrats in the world to lose a popular vote election in 20 years? I don't trust that person, you know, to look at their overall political judgment. I'm just saying, whenever you look at somebody like him, it's like, what, you're going to put up, do we really want to point to who's the guy who lost in 92? Dan Quayle?
You're going to trust the political judgment of the dude who almost got recalled in California, a Democrat who almost got recalled in California?
I wish he almost got recalled. He blew it out.
The fact they even made it to that point, though, is crazy.
Yeah, so that's an interesting conversation there. And I think that's something we all need to talk a little bit more about. Maybe, I don't know, I can have a separate show about this. We really need to start thinking about this. What we see online, does that transfer into votes? And that's all I'm asking. It's just a legitimate question, because I even said this, even with Jill Stein's campaign, there was a lot of energy online, but when it came time to vote, a lot of people stayed home, right? There were people who told me on the call-in program that they wanted to go out and vote green, but they felt like they would be guilt tripped if they did. And I don't get that either. It's like, nobody's with you in the voting booth, but whatever. But ultimately, a lot of people stayed home. And so that's what I'm saying. Is that online energy, does it transfer into votes? And I think we need to start asking those questions and start thinking about those things. That's why I say things aren't always what they seem. I saw all the energy and popularity that Bernie Sanders had, which is why I was kind of surprised he didn't get more votes than he did in the primary. I really thought going into Super Tuesday, especially how he in Nevada and New Hampshire and all that kind of stuff, he blew away there. So I was like, okay, yeah, going to Super Tuesday, he's going to do really well. And he didn't do as well as I thought. So again, something to think about. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.